Hi, I'm Bonnie, one of the team members from Red Pine Quilt Shop in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. Today we're going to be talking about t-shirt quilts, those memory quilts that oftentimes high school seniors like, or people want them for memory of events or whatever. But we're going to look at the process of making a t-shirt quilt. The first thing you need to do is gather up all of the t-shirts that you want to use for this quilt. Take a good look at them and decide what size you want to use for this. Now the block size needs to be somewhat consistent, or at least something that you can put together. The first thing that you'll need to do is stabilize the quilt, each piece, okay? So we'll start by rough cutting the t-shirt. Once you have rough cut the t-shirt, by rough cutting, what I mean is just simply taking off the sleeves, cutting down the sides, and taking off the neck. Leave as much space on the t-shirt as possible. Then we're going to stabilize the t-shirts. The product that I prefer using is June Taylor's T-shirt Quilt Fusible Interfacing. This is basically the same product as the Pellon SF 101. The difference is that the Pellon SF 101 is 20 inches wide, and June Taylor's product is 60 inches wide by 2 yards. I even did the math to figure out which was more economical, and the June Taylor does come out less expensive than the Pellon, even not figuring in the waist. So this is the product that we prefer using. Okay, when you're using this product, you'll need to cut your fusible at least an inch larger than what your finished block size is going to be. So start figuring out about what size you're going to use. I like to use a pretty standard size block. If you're a more experienced quilter, you may wish to use a graph paper and make a fancier quilt. It's strictly up to you. But what you're going to do is put your fabric, your t-shirt, face down onto your ironing surface, and then you'll put your fusible interfacing over the top and iron it down. Iron it and iron it and iron it again. And as you are putting your quilt together, you're going to iron it again to make sure that you have a good fuse. Now, another product that people have used is a non-woven iron-on or fusible interfacing. That kind of works, but the thing is that it's harder to get the iron, use as hot of an iron on that kind of a product. So you would have to use a pressing cloth for one thing. But to get that good fuse, it is a little bit more difficult. After you have fused your interfacing onto the back of your t-shirt, then you'll need to cut your t-shirt block the size that you desire. You'll need to look and center your block and decide how much of a border you want. Obviously, you're going to need at least a 1/4 inch border. Otherwise, with using a 1/4 inch seam, you're going to cut off part of your design. Now, would you like to cut off part of the United Way sign, part of the date, part of Day of Caring? What is it that you want to cut off on your design? Probably nothing, so you'll need to make it so that it is larger. To do this, I like to use a large square ruler. I have found that the 15.5-inch Creative Grids ruler works the best for me. I like it because when I lay it down on my block or on my t-shirt, it flattens it out. I've got lots of space. And then I work on, from there I work on getting it so that it is exactly centered. Say if I was using this particular t-shirt that I haven't taken apart, see how easy it is to just lay it on there and decide exactly where I'm going to cut and how to get it that size. Now this particular one I did a 13-inch block. So then you put the 6.5, go the 6.5-inch line right down the very center of the design and go out and get to the 13-inch size. It's important that your blocks be uniform in size unless you are doing a design that does not require it to be uniform. Okay, so well, after you've stabilized your t-shirts, then it's time to figure out what kind of pattern you're going to use. Now we have some different patterns in the shop that you might want to use. This one is called Bounce Panel, and it calls for a standard size. I imagine you could use the basic instructions and change the size of your block without too much extra trouble. There is Block Talk, which is one of my favorites. The Block Talk has in the pattern the dimensions that you need for all of the different sizes of blocks. I think it starts at like a 5-inch block and it goes up to a larger block. But it's a very, very good pattern, very easy to understand instructions, and it turns out really, really nicely. Another pattern similar to that is the Block Talk Stars. The Block Talk Stars pattern has stars on it as well as the blocks. Another thing that you might want to use is our T-shirt Quilts Made Easy book. This particular book has many different designs in it for t-shirt quilts. It takes you through the entire process, and then it shows you different ways of putting it together. And it has the grid paper, the quadrant paper. Quadrant paper is available at your local office store. You can download it from the internet and just print your own. Or if you would like, we do have some at the shop. But there are different patterns. Here's one with a twist. It shows you how to put all of those together that are not just simply a block pattern. This is the pattern that I used as an example for the quilt that I have put together behind me. You'll see in this quilt, I picked my width of the blocks and went with that. The blue t-shirt at the top that says Another Trip Around the Sun was my largest design. That told me what size I was going to have the width for all of my blocks. Most of my blocks are square. However, notice that these are rectangular. These shirts had a design that was going to be more difficult to center if it was the larger square. Notice this Key West, Florida one. That t-shirt had the design way up here. And this is where the neckline started. So I was going to have more space down here, and it would have gone all the way down here. That would have looked a little off, I thought. And so I chose 4 t-shirts that had a narrower design and just simply made those shorter. Also, the quilt was getting quite large, so I didn't need the extra size either. Now, sometimes you're going to run into a time where you've got raglan sleeves or a V-neck or something, and you need more space than what you have fabric. If that's the case, look in your stash and find a fabric that blends really well with the background, with the t-shirt color, and simply sew that in. I've done that on a number of quilts, and it's amazing. You cannot tell it unless you go up really, really close. If you get a good match, it's pretty easy. And most of your quilts, other than this one, most of your t-shirts are going to be gray or black or pretty basic colors that you more than likely would have in your stash. If not, you can just go and find something from the color wall that matches quite well. Another thing that you need is some kind of a sashing. For this particular quilt, I looked and I thought, okay, what am I going to do for a sashing? Usually I go to the color wall and pick colors that are in the printing of the t-shirt. But when I looked at these t-shirts as I was rough cutting them, I thought of the Dan Morris collection that we had at the shop and brought my t-shirts in and went over there and looked, and I found this particular print, and I thought, if this isn't the perfect sashing fabric, I don't know what is. Here's this orange, here's the green, the yellow is in it, the aqua is in it, all of the colors on the parrots are in it. Every color that's in the t-shirts is in this fabric. It just pops it, I think. And then I used, as my cornerstones, I used super black. That, I think, just pulls it all together. At the shop, we do have a number of fabrics that are made pretty much for t-shirt quilts or that go perfect for the sashing on t-shirt quilts. Look at the black and gray fabric. Can't you just see writing in just about every color that's in the speckles there? That's going to pop those colors. The last 2 fabrics that I chose are part of the Dan Morris collection that we have, and they show different colors that you could pick out of some t-shirts also. Or, as I said, go to our color wall. We have an extensive color wall where you're going to be able to find just about every color that you would want to put into your quilt. This block talk pattern shows 3 or 4 different fabrics that they have used. You can do that if you would like. On this, with this particular pattern, because you do have 2 sashings right next to each other, it is kind of important that you not just use one color for your sashing. I used this basic idea when I did this quilt, but just did the 2.5-inch sashing. When you're putting the quilt together, it's important that you press your seams so that your t-shirt is flat. Notice none of these are folding in. They all fold out. That's going to allow you to have a flatter quilt. It's also recommended that you not have two t-shirt fabrics butting up to each other. The reason for that is that it's harder for the long armor to not skip stitches. And that's an important step. Speaking of the long armor, some people think, oh, I've got so much money into this quilt already, I think I'll skip the long armor and just tie it. Okay, tying a quilt is not going to last as long as having it long armed. Yes, long arming is expensive, but you get what you pay for. If you choose to tie instead of long arming, be sure that you stitch each block, go across the block with your stitching before you add any of your sashing. So stitch across your block with your machine. Okay? Probably every 2 inches apart, 2 to 3 inches apart. I would say the same width as your sashing because I like uniformity. But that is going to help make sure that your bonding stays, and it is going to hold it together if you've chosen not to have it long armed. A lot of work. I also, in this particular quilt, used some of the smaller designs. You can see here, these were things that were on the sleeve of the t-shirts. And that was fun, I thought. On another quilt that I did for a high school student, they oftentimes on the back of their t-shirts, they'll have their name or their nickname or something about them. That particular guy's last name was Nye, and he was a runner. And now he's running college track and doing quite well. But the team called him their Annihilator. And so they had spelt Annihilator with Nye spelt like he spelt his last name, and had that across one of his shirts. Well, that was something that was very significant to him. And so I included that in the border of the quilt. But it's fun to do some things just like that. On this particular quilt, they were the southernmost donor on a blood drive, and so I included that in the border. The boats and bars is one of their big fundraisers, and that particular t-shirt, I knew they wanted it in the quilt, but that was what was on the front of the t-shirt. That was the whole front. Okay, can you imagine if I would have had that on a block this size or even this size? It would have looked ridiculous. But blending it into the border gave it a unique look. Okay, in backing the quilt, I like to use Cuddle. We also have many wide backs that work well, or you can just use one of your sashing fabrics, whatever you would like. For the batting on the quilt, I highly recommend Dream Cotton. Dream Cotton is my favorite batting. It is 100% cotton. That means it's warm in the winter and cool in the summer. I know it's a little bit more expensive, but that's because it's a natural fiber. Of the natural fibers, it is the least expensive. Wool and silk are also natural fibers, but they tend to be a little bit more expensive. Oftentimes people will just opt to use a polyester fiber fill. Yeah, you can use it. However, in washing, repeated washings, it tends to wad up. It also tends to pop out and bleed onto the top of the fabric, so you have little hairs that you can pick out, little pieces of the fiber fill. The other thing, the most important thing, is that when you use a polyester fiber fill batting, it doesn't breathe. What that means is that in the summer, it's hot and you sweat. In the winter, it's cold and you freeze. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd rather be nice and warm and snuggly in the winter and cool in the summer than just the opposite. So I always use Dream Cotton. Think of it as like wearing a polyester t-shirt in the summer on a 90-degree day, and how you just are sweating like I don't know what, but it's not fun. Where cotton, it breathes and you feel better. So I say Dream Cotton is the way to go. Tying the quilt instead of having it long-armed, I'm not going to tell you you can't do it. But I'd like to tell you a little story about a customer I had a couple years ago. She came in and she plopped this t-shirt quilt on my counter and she said, "I've been hired to fix this. What do you recommend?" Well, it had been stabilized with a non-woven fabric, which had now given way. They had butted the two t-shirts up to each other, and the stabilizer didn't always get all the way to the edge, and so the seams had popped. It had been tied, and the ties were coming out. It was a mess. She said, "What I have to do is take this quilt apart and redo it." Oh my goodness. I said, "I can't imagine how long that's going to take you." And she said, frankly, I don't care how long it takes me to do it. He's paying me, and he's paying me by the hour, and he can afford it, and he's going to pay dearly for this. If that guy got by with $600, I think he got by cheap. But that would, do it right now or do it right later. Which do you want to do? I'd rather do it right the first time. And like I said, you get what you pay for. Okay, just a few things to wrap up here. The patterns that we have panel bounce, block talk, and block talk stars. The book that I recommend that you read is T-Shirt Quilts Made Easy. The products that I recommend that you use, the June Taylor T-Shirt Quilt Fusible Interfacing. I also recommend the 15-inch or 15.5-inch, Creative Grids Square Ruler. For your cutting, it's nice to have a rotating cutting mat. This happens to be mine. I thought I would save a little money and get the 12-inch instead of the larger one. Biggest mistake I made. Splurge, get the bigger one. Unless you do a lot of small projects, then this one might be more usable for you, but I recommend the larger one. Then Dream Cotton is the other thing that I recommend. I use this for all of my quilts. I love it. Okay, and that pretty much wraps up our demo today on t-shirt quilts. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to stop in the shop. We're open on Fridays and Saturdays. Thank you.